Hi, I'm David Partika. I created CSSBurner as a rapid optimization tool for scanning, statistically analyzing, minifying, and beautifying CSS. Now, today I'd like to show you an updated tutorial on how to use the minification tool, which corresponds to this icon right here, third one from the left. So I already have a style sheet copied, and so now let's paste it into the text area. It'll take a couple seconds. Now to use the Minify functionality on CSSBurner, let's first click this icon and we'll select our Minify options, which I have them all pre-selected already. Now it also helps to be able to look at the default settings to know what the minifier does by default so that you have a better idea of what to select for the more advanced options in the checkboxes. So the default is that white space comments, they're removed. We see that long hex color code, so if you have something like hashtag and then 0 6 times, that will be truncated to hashtag 0 3 times. Any kind of longhand properties such as padding or margin that could be condensed. So if you have something like padding 4 pixel, 4 pixel, 4 pixel, 4 pixel, that will be condensed by default to padding 4 pixel, just one time. That's all you need it for that. Terminal semicolons at the end of a declaration block are removed, and if you ever have a 0 length or in some cases 0 angle, the unit will be removed because the parser knows that 0 pixels, for example, corresponds to 0, the length of 0. So now with that in mind, we could think about the more advanced options that we would like to select in the checkboxes. Now, combine repeat rules. This means that if you have, say, 2 blocks, let's say you have one that's div display none and then p display none as a second block, those will be grouped by just simply comma selectors or separating the selectors by commas. Now, repeat selectors. If you have anywhere in the style sheet, if let's say you have something like H5 and then a set of properties, and then elsewhere you have something again H5 as your selector and set of properties, those properties will be condensed into one block. So you'll just have a single H5 and then all the properties will be in one block. So the third optimization or option, I'm sorry, for Minify is for nth star, like nth child or nth of type pseudo classes. And so for these pseudo classes, you'll often see, for example, something that could be, say, even. So if you want the even children within a selector, or the odd children, you can also alternatively write these as in the case of, say, even, you could write that as 2n. But 2n is shorter than even. So you save 2 bytes by writing 2n. So this option will take those kind of pseudo classes and will condense or make sure that the most condensed version of the rule is written down. So if you've written down even, what will be outputted is instead 2n. If you've written down 2n plus 1 or 2n minus 1 for odd rules, then instead what will be written is odd in its place. The next is omit defaults. A good example of this is, say, in the linear gradient function, the direction, if it's to bottom or 180 degrees or negative 180 degrees or some equivalent of this. So for example, pi radians or negative pi radians, and there's other units for angles too. These do not need to be written because linear gradient knows that if you do not specify a direction as the first parameter, then that direction is to bottom. So you don't have to write to bottom or any of those angular measures that I mentioned before. So defaults would be omitted because the parser knows already. Now, optional quotes, something like this would be if you have, say, an attribute selector. So let's say you have something that has no escapable characters in the attribute selector. For example, input type equals text. There's no need to quote the string text, but most oftentimes in style sheets you will see that selector quoted there. It doesn't need to be. Another example is when you have the URL function. If you have a URL, say URL image.png in quotes, you don't need that in quotes. The quotes are optional there. And finally, when common names can be rewritten shorter, they will be. So a good example of this would be a color such as a long name such as Rebecca Purple. That takes up so many characters, but instead you could just write the hex color for that. Another example would be with position. If you have, let's say, background position, something like left top, well, that would be equivalent to 0 space 0. You don't need to write out the entire string left or top. It could just be more succinctly written as 0 space 0. So those common names will be applied, will be rewritten when this option is selected. So those are the options for minification. Now for data management, there have been some new options that have been added. One is that you could specify if the input is a file here, either a .css or a .txt file. You can also output to screen. Now this is a new option since the first video that I created. And this means, so instead of having the file automatically downloaded for the results of the Minify, you can just have it output to the screen. And that's what I'm going to choose here. Now, if you've logged in and or subscribed to the newsletter, these other possible options will also now light up. And for example, you could use a custom file name. So instead of just having the standard file name, which includes the timestamp, you can label the file however you want. You could also output the file as a .css instead of the default, which is a .txt if you're going to download. And finally, you could use a tracking name. So what I've introduced with the more advanced options is the ability to use tabs. So you could have multiple results open at once and saved within tabs, just like on Excel. And you'll need a way to actually keep track of what each tab represents. So you could use a tracking name so that you could so I could tell you, let's say if tab 1, if you forgot what tab 1 was, well, you could just say label it as minification or minify number 1 or something like that, and that would give you some indication as to what tab represents what output. So that's what the tracking name would be for. There's also going to be some more advanced features later that I'm going to add, but we can talk about that some other time. And so now, with this in mind, let's minify this file, and let's see what kind of output that we get. So it's going to take about somewhere between 5 and 10 seconds, depends on the size of the file. Here we see it was a big file, it was about 702 kilobytes. So we are processing, and now the file has been minified. And we see here that approximately 46 kilobytes have been chopped off in this output. So that's pretty good. That's a percentage of maybe somewhere around 7%, something like that. So now with this output, we could do a couple things. We can go to the menu here, and we could zoom in. Maybe this print is a little too small for you. We see the text getting bigger as I click the zoom in, or zoom out if the text is too large. We could also print the screen. If you for some reason needed to print this output, that option is there for you. We could select all of the output and already have it copied to the clipboard. If, let's say, you want to scan after this, you could scan, and just by Control V into the text area. and we could reset. Now this email option is going to be for premium accounts. I'm going to add this a little bit later. So right now it is not accessible. And so this is the menu. So let's say something that you might want to do, and I may add a feature for this later to directly do this, but let's say you want to now scan to make sure that your output is exactly what you want it to be. So we could select all. Now let's reset CSSBurner and simply Control V. And now if we wanted to scan, we see that the character count here is lower than it was before. Before it was 702 kilobytes, now it's about 655. So if we want to scan, we can do so, or we can do whatever we want at this point. There's also stats, or you could beautify, or whatever you want to do. So that is, in a nutshell, the Minify functionality for CSSBurner. Now, if you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. And if you have not subscribed to the Optimized CSS channel already, please do so, and look for some more helpful videos in the future.